So welcome everybody again. Thanks for coming, because many people might probably have gone to the beach with this weather. But actually, this is perhaps the most important. I don't know if they are okay. This is perhaps one of the most important or interesting parts of the day, because we will have all the speakers plus three experts that I will present now. And also we count with Esther, who is a journalist. And the idea, well, now I will introduce you properly. But the idea is to actually, as part of the HUMAINT project, we were asked to, apart from organizing this event, we would like to make a summary of the discussions that we have here and put this in a form of a policy brief that also helps decision makers and policy makers in this particular field of the impact of artificial intelligence and how it will actually impact clinical decision making. So we have Stella Paniagua. We have invited her. She's an award-winning science and tech journalist. She writes in the main newspapers and science magazines in Spain, such as El País, El Mundo, to name a few of them. And also she is writing in international publications like Cancer World. During the last 10 years, she has been following and analyzing the evolution of technologies, such as big data and artificial intelligence, as well as their ethical and societal impact. And she has been named Spanish Science of the Writer of the Year, finalist of the European Science Writer of the Year. She is winner of the Roche Institute Foundation Prize, of the Vodafone Journalism Award, and very, very recently, actually last week was it, she also was named winner of the Accenture Journalism Prize in the artificial intelligence category. So that's Esther, and also I will also present Nicolas Duchateau, who will be part of the panel as well. He was actually my thesis supervisor. He did his PhD here at UPF and stayed for a postdoc for a couple of years. Then he moved to INRIA in France. And now he's actually associate professor at the University of Lyon in the Creatis Institute, in the Creatis Lab, sorry. His research focuses on statistical analysis of medical imaging to better understand disease apparition and evolution. So of course, his contribution will be very relevant, very pertinent. We also count with the presence of Naila Siddiqui, who already presented herself doing questions in the audience. She comes from Imperial College. She is a senior clinician affiliated with the NIH for almost 26 years. Her career has evolved in gynecology, but she is also now particularly involved in informatics and healthcare. And she is associate director for medical education and lead at Imperial College. And she is also known to embrace technology in the delivery of high standards of healthcare. And she is also a frequent speaker in disruptive technology and events and talks. And to finish, we also count with the presence of Enrique Terol. He keeps on saying, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a clinician. He comes more from the policy making or the policy aspect. So he works as policy officer in DG Santé at the European Commission. He is in charge of the implementation of the European reference networks, which, if I understand correctly, it's something great to manage rare diseases. So they're actually connecting different health centers who are specialized in rare diseases, and the idea is to connect them to give support to patients who are in one part of Europe, so they get the experience of many other clinical centers with a specialty in that particular malady. He is also, he is specialized in family and community medicine. He has a master and a PhD in public health, and his professional experience involved managerial positions of primary and specialized healthcare, as well as healthcare planning. He was Deputy General Director of Quality and Health Planning of the Ministry of Health in Spain from 2004 to 2008. And now he is coordinator of the area of health. He was also coordinator of the area of health in the Spanish presidency of the European Union from 2008 to 2011. And now he is working in these European research networks, developing the legal and organizational basis for their setup. So thank you the panel for being here. Thank you to Esther for moderating, and I think we'll have a great experience with this discussion. Thank you.
Well, thanks to you, Sergio. We are all very thankful. And thanks again to the survivors here. This is going to be intimate, but also very good, I hope. I hope we don't disappoint you. So we were talking this morning about AI and machine learning applied to healthcare, health systems, the impact, societal impact of AI in the health field, and also about what the main challenges is about, like, are technical, or is more about doctor's mentality, or is more about patient engagement, or is more about the different language machines and humans talk. I'd like to go more in depth on this debate, and also about on the questions that Emilia told this morning. So let's start with the first one. The first one is, how will AI impact doctors? And I'd like to hear first of all the opinions of the new speakers coming to this panel, which are Enrique, Naila, and Nicolas, and perhaps maybe a few more that want to add something, and then we will switch to the following question, because this is actually the question that we have addressed more this morning. So here we go. Nicolas, I think, is the one who wants to start.
Yeah, I may start with this. What I would say is that I will repeat the terms I heard in a debate a few times ago we organized, that actually most clinicians, or well, I'd say most clinicians spend many of their time not doing medicine, but doing boring or time-consuming tasks, especially radiologists. And actually the main current impact to their work is not losing their jobs, and but actually starting doing clinical care and doing their actual job. So AI will impact them in doing these automatic and time-consuming tasks, and they can actually with this start focusing on what they were not doing, actually taking care of the patients.
This is the promise of technology to help, it's not only doctors, but also like in other professions. But sometimes it happens that it's not real.
Or it's starting to happen, I would say. Alan was saying, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that is a good question.
Concrete examples would be just like the time that is spent just segmenting organs. Manual segmentations are very boring, prone to errors, and that's the main promise of AI at the moment.
It is a promise or a reality?
It's starting to be a reality, but it's still a promise in many cases. It lacks generalization for the moment.
Maybe Naila wants to add something? Or Naila?
Thank you very much for inviting me. Yes. I think artificial intelligence, we've had a debate earlier on about whether it should be called artificial intelligence or anything. I would say any disruptive technology which is now present in healthcare. As a clinician, what do we want to do? We want to make accurate diagnosis as soon as possible, and have a management plan and heal the patient in the best, for the best outcomes. That is what clinicians want to do and aspire to do. Anything that will help us in doing that is welcome. So how will it impact doctors? That if my outcomes become better for my patients using any technology, then obviously it will be for the benefit. But there is a whole debate behind that, that who chooses the right, the insight in choosing the right technology for the right purpose at the right time by the right people. So it's not as simple as that, but I think it will totally change the outlook of clinicians, their learning. So we need to be educated in a new way. Our curriculum, our medical students' curriculum needs to embed technology adaptation, I think, or more change management. Because today we are talking about AI, 5 years down the line, we may be talking about something else. That is the speed of change that is happening. And hence, doctors need to be equipped with the tools that they are going to be using when they become, even when they qualify. So, as to the question, how will it impact doctors? Their whole training will become different, or should become different by now. Their practice of medicine is just like, instead of using a scalpel, we were taught how to use a diathermy, probe. Now we will need to be told how to use the AI-based tool. So it is about a learning curve.
We were talking, oh, sorry.
Yeah, maybe I want to get into that. If I get the microphone, okay. I think this is quite an interesting topic that you bring up, because you say that medical students should be trained into this. I have a very different opinion, in the sense that I think the systems that we provide should fit in the way they do medicine, and they should only change the training if it's clinically relevant. There are problems with the training, for sure, in a lot of cases. And also when you say, like, new people, they used to work with smartphones. They have an idea what these things can do. What I think is that from the technical side, you have to provide something that fits in the way that medical doctors work. It's partially what I said this morning. It's like, if they're not doing something, it's likely because that something has been tried out and doesn't work, rather than that it's something that they never ever thought of or never kind of did. So in that sense, it's like, what to me is I think a little bit is the problem from the provision side, from the ones that provide tools. It should be something that fits in, and preferably, like Nico says, lowers their burden and replaces something so that they can do other things, or can make it more fun in some ways. But
can I just rebut on
no, of
that?
course.
Yeah.
Just once, very briefly.
In a brief,
So,
short way.
I think I didn't make myself clear. What I don't mean is that we don't want medical students to take on an added curriculum of being in informatics experts. But what I'm saying is that they need to be taught about the whole concept of that there is a side sort of technology-based resource in the current phase of AI, which will be something that they need to understand the basic principles. Because we've seen our FY1 doctors, when they qualify, they are thrown into, for example, about 5-6 years ago, 10 years ago, the simulation-based training, right? And there's a whole process of briefing and debriefing and whatever. People who come from overseas in the NHS have not been taught that. And there is a huge learning curve, while as the medical colleges in the UK have actually introduced it to them.
Yeah.
So
Or maybe we can do these things at the same time. We were talking before about useful tools that are not being implemented. Alan was talking about it. Also during lunch, we were talking with Rahul that lots of like healthcare providers, for instance, in the US, introduce like fancy AI tools just because they are fancy but not useful at all. They are not proved useful at the end. So who has to decide on whether it's useful or not, or it has to be evidence-based? We need like more clinical tests, or who is responsible of doing that, for the implementation of these technologies in the proper way? I don't know if Enrique would like to answer this question, or maybe go to the debate before.
I don't know. Probably I will mix it.
Okay.
Just, I will talk first about the first question, is about how can I impact doctors. I will talk about a specific type of doctors, which are the doctors I am dealing with, which are very highly specialized doctors that are dealing with rare diseases and complex diseases. When we are talking about rare diseases and complex diseases, it's exactly what Dr. Alan Fraser was presenting before in a slide about the complexity of medicine. All this complexity is exactly the complexity of rare diseases. 80% of the diseases are genetic based. We have more than 6,000 rare diseases, which means that you will have, as a doctor, as a clinician, there's the opportunity to see sometimes 1-2 cases of this disease in your whole life, and you will have several needs to be solved. And then the question here, the promising technology of AI will provide answer to these questions. That's the first question my colleagues are asking me, because they are very busy. So they don't have the time to play. So they need to have solutions for their problems. The problem is how to concentrate the information in a way that I have a decision support tool to have a better, more accurate differential diagnosis, and to orient me on which could be the alternatives. That's the first question, that if the artificial intelligence is able to answer, that will have a success. Otherwise, will be something that could be useful more for the research side, more to generate hypotheses, as it was presented, than to solve clinical problems.
We're talking about tools that are useful, but I wonder, because we were addressing before the ethical issue and the societal impact. So apart from being useful and helpful, what are the ethical considerations that we must have before implementing these technologies? Like, do we have to do like anticipatory tech assessment? Who wants to answer?
I may echo your comment. The priority thing is not training the doctors, but informing them, and the same we should do with the patients. So it's not educating, like changing the way they reason, but as when you're a consumer and you buy chocolate, you'd like to know what is inside, not the process, how it's made, but what is inside. The same, that's the main, I would say, first ethical concern we should do.
Alfredo.
Well, I'm going to do something that probably you shouldn't do with journalists, is go back to the previous question and not answer.
Okay. Fair enough.
No, because, I mean, there is something I think is important here. I mean, we are talking artificial intelligence, and whether we should, I mean, how could we fit it within with the real system? We are maybe lying ourselves. It's not about artificial intelligence. That's, I mean, and definitely artificial intelligence is not much of a technology. I mean, unless you are talking about assistive robots and things like that. I mean, what medical doctors and the systems in which they work should be much more alert about is data science. Okay, what to do with data, and which criteria to use to analyze those data, and how to treat those data according to their social impact, which is completely different. I mean, artificial intelligence here is completely accessory. I mean, it's, I mean, hospitals and the medical sector in general is still not data aware enough. I mean, I've been talking about being a data-centric kind of thing, but it's still very incipient. I mean, most hospitals do not have a proper data management policy. I mean, tell them about artificial intelligence, you know? I mean, they don't even know how to treat properly their data. So, I mean, without that, the rest is just the icing in the cake, and the cake is not there. That's my
That's the basis of the problem there. Yeah, I agree. So I'm also gonna go like on the answer before, because Nicolas, you were talking about patience, and actually our next question to answer is, how will AI impact patience? And this has a lot to do also with data, of course, and privacy and all of this stuff. So maybe Alfredo, you have something to add here. So Alan, please.
Let me start by just highlighting one conflict or competition that's unresolved, and that is that the European Data Protection Regulation gives patients the right to be forgotten or the right to take their data out of a database. But if you have a medical device, you have a responsibility to monitor its performance and to provide annual reports to the regulatory authorities on how it's performing, which may be incompatible with individuals removing their data from the database. And that legal competition between different European Union regulations is unresolved at the moment. So actually, it's not clear that patients would be able to remove themselves from a database. There's also a moral or ethical issue that if a patient refuses to allow their data to be entered into a database that's being analysed for the common good, then are they entitled to benefit from the insights that that research provides? We've never questioned that when you've been doing small studies, because we've always allowed everyone to benefit from a few people volunteering their services. But now that we have the potential for databases that capture everyone in an electronic health record, it does become an issue at last as well. So there are questions there that we really don't know. We do interact with patients on our committees now, and they give us very useful insights, but I don't think the patients' representative organisations who act on the Brussels stage know the answers to these questions either. They also have the issue of having access to so much data now that can be analysed and managed by machine learning algorithms and presented to them. But that's a problem with internet scraping or data scraping or whatever it's called, that we can't know whether we trust the information or not that all these sources summarize. And so patients will, I think, still have to rely on expert advice. You're raising a whole lot of difficult questions. Will it affect their privacy, health and well-being? Certainly their privacy may be affected. The model that I'm aware of in the Netherlands and in Flanders and Flams in Belgium and some other places is now opt-out. And the experience in the Netherlands is that only 1 or 2% of patients will ever refuse to have their data used for health purposes. But we do already have the situation where medical imaging data and data from electronic implanted devices in cardiology are remotely monitored and analysed by machine learning algorithms by companies in a non-anonymized format sometimes. And who controls that is something we're thinking about at the moment, and we think we should actually have a different model where the patient has the right to control who has access to their data. But that involves a lot of changes in systems for managing data and doesn't deal with this issue of having everybody in a large database because it's useful for research. So I'm raising questions rather than answering any of them.
Alan, maybe I think this topic that you raised is quite interesting because the whole device thing, because you're also on the device regulatory board. So when you're talking about, it's predominantly pacemakers and this kind of things, it's like they're continuously collecting data. The companies are collecting this, and the companies are not giving access neither to researchers nor to medical doctors, saying that it's their proprietary kind of intellectual property that's behind. What's the total think about this? Because this is a serious conflict of interest, what will be the solution there?
So we have a task force currently from the committee that I chair looking into implantable cardiac electronic devices from the perspective of cybersecurity and data protection and consent. And that's implicit. There are machine learning aspects of managing these data, and we're just drafting our recommendations, so I can't prejudge what will happen. But I think the model that we've seen of the patient controlling the data is what is correct, at least ethically and legally. but patients will need to be helped through that by a process of adaptive consent, which is the concept that's now being developed, where you can step by step give consent for different uses of your own health data. But I don't actually think the companies should own the data. They have to have it for regulatory purposes, but they can have it in a completely anonymized format, and they can still identify problems by monitoring without knowing who the individual is. But actually the weakest part of the whole system is the hospital database where the information is analyzed.
But even partially related to that, just to see whether that comes in, is even when you look, for example, at imaging, in a lot of imaging, the images that you can get, so the patient can get the images on a CD, for example, can give it to a researcher, but a lot of the information in the images is in proprietary kind of coded or encoded form that only the companies can read it. So again, where is the data ownership? And
so the next task force that we're just setting up is on diagnostic imaging.
Okay.
And one of the briefs for that group is to advise on, from an academic and clinical perspective, and with patients and other people involved and with engineers, what is necessary for the clinical evaluation of diagnostic software. And we have overlap with our group on cybersecurity because there is remote access to imaging data at the moment by companies that we think is also wrong unless that's anonymized. So but every time I discuss this with colleagues, it becomes quite philosophical because we live in a capitalist society, and the European Commission seeks European economic prosperity as its primary objective for European citizens, and that's very different from the motives of people working in medicine and healthcare and science. And we're not going to resolve those issues.
Clarissa had something to add.
Yes, something to add about the impact of AI on patients. And for me, I would like to tell here the beautiful story, that the AI is going to help patients. We are going to have access to health no matter where we are, at the highest level. But the reality is that this is not true. I mean, right now it's not like that. It's still, although AI is becoming something that we can touch in many fields in healthcare, it's still science fiction. And that's a pity, because there are many things that patients can have access to already, but there are some challenges. There is this gap between how doctors work and how they do, and how the machines and the technicians or the technical people are working is completely separated, and it's not, they are not talking about what is needed. And it's related also to your question that you had before, like who is the person has to make the question what is needed. I think it's something that needs to be combined. The question has to come from both sides. I have to learn about clinical problems to understand what I can do with my knowledge to help them, and the people from the clinical part have to know about the artificial intelligence to know how they can request or what they can ask for this kind of technology. So I think till that is not solved and it's a challenge, I think that the patients are a bit blocked for gaining here with artificial intelligence, unfortunately.
That's probably a good answer. Ursula, yeah, I was going to ask you, so I'm happy that you...
I just want to pick up on what you said, and I think you're totally correct. Right now we see that a lot of the technological innovation is not really driven by the needs on the ground, neither by the needs of the patients nor by the needs of public health or the personnel and the medical staff working on the ground. So I think what we need is not so much the question, oh, look at the technology, that's really fancy, look what we can do with it, but rather we need to ask, what are the needs on the ground, and what outcomes can we produce, which positive outcomes can we achieve that could not perhaps be achieved by other means, cheaper means perhaps even. So yeah, we need to change, I think, our attitude and look at the challenge more, yeah, on a needs, or from a needs perspective. What are the needs that we need to address? And I think that's something that is missing right now, and both in low and middle income countries, but also in high income countries.
Naila?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Sorry. Talking about the low-income countries, because I think this is something that is very important for this type of things that we're doing, is like, what should be the driver? Who should drive it? Because what you see is that when you look in reality, the whole hype of artificial intelligence is driven by the big companies, because they make a huge amount of money of it. And then the next driver is healthcare systems that would make their costs lower, which is not a big driver. And currently the lowest driver is for the idealists that want to make things better for the patients. But how do you do that in low-income countries? Because there's, I don't think, a lot of drivers. As you said before, currently it's a lot of philanthropy that is kind of funding this, but how can you merge this with some of the other things? And especially unless there's some commercial interest, I think it will be extremely difficult. Also, given what Alan said, it's like in the end, it's economic wealth in brackets that the countries try to strive for, and then they hope that that leads to health also. So how do you do that in low-income countries or low-resource countries?
Yeah, I think that's a very important and tricky question, actually, tricky to answer. My impression is that in low-income countries, the situation is a bit different. It's not so much driven by tech companies, maybe also and increasingly in the future, but so far it's mainly driven by NGOs, by humanitarian actors, by philanthropies and stuff like organizations like that. And I think that's good to a certain degree, and it's important because someone has to elicit the change and someone has to start, kind of. But all these projects have to be scaled up after a while, and they have to be scaled up, or the basis for scaling them up has to be, they have to be somehow economically sustainable. I'm not talking about like a marketization of the health system, that's not what I want to say, but I think these projects have to be sustainable eventually. And to achieve that, I think what's really important is some degree of like local and national ownership. I mean, you cannot just have projects, multiple projects often, which are actually not scaled up, they are not sustainable, and they are only driven by external actors. You need local ownership. People need to, well, buy into the projects. They need to kind of like the projects. They need to see a value in them. And then, I guess, if you achieve local ownership, then these projects will also become more sustainable. I think that's really terribly important from my point of view.
Sorry, Naila and Emilia want to comment on it?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this works. Does it work?
I don't think so. You can come here.
Yeah, I just wanted to answer to this idea of who is driving the innovation, which are the problems we are trying to solve. Because I sometimes have the feeling in the more engineering community, we are trying to solve problems where we have data for. And sometimes it's like there is a huge amount of researchers in machine learning, in AI, also in social robots, and they are always hunger of problems. I mean, they always wanted to have data to work on. And I find that sometimes we spend our careers on stupid games, or I mean things that, because we have the problem formalized, we have the data. And this is something that is important to understand, that sometimes, and also in other areas such as healthcare, or might not understand maybe that what can technology bring as a benefit, and how to connect with this community to ask the right questions. And then put the right challenges, because I think then it will be much more fruitful for all of us. So I have the impression it's not that we engineers do not know what they say. We have a cool technology. We try to think, this can be useful for healthcare, but we don't have the real problems. So I think it should be more or a way that organizations define which are the right priorities and which are the problems that will benefit more people, will benefit more the system, so that computer scientists could work on that. So I just wanted to point this out.
Naila? Yeah, you can answer, Alan.
It's just a very brief comment. It's also something we discussed over lunch. One of the issues in the difference between the research driven by engineers and that by clinicians is European Union funding. There is a huge budget in the European Union for IT research, for informatics, for machine learning, for artificial intelligence, driven by economic directorates in the European Commission with RTD and research calls. But that is separate from the health-driven research budget within Horizon 2020 or whichever we're now considering. And actually, we need to bring those together. It shouldn't be driven by industry and engineering so much as with medicine and biology and science completely integrated. And that's probably a sort of organizational issue for the European Commission. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but I think that partly reflects what you just said.
If I can add something, I think, well, at least in Europe, engineers, they don't just do things because they are cool. It's because they think there's a problem and they want to solve it. Otherwise, there is no reason to do something. Maybe on Silicon Valley, they just do things because they can. But I think in Europe it's different, if I could add that. But Naila, sorry.
There have been a few questions and responses in between. I just want to contribute to two of the things that were mentioned. First of all, about low-income countries. So originally I come from Pakistan, and the health challenges are there. And you're right, the drivers in low-income countries are usually charitable organizations or NGOs. However, when I was in Geneva earlier on for the World Summit of Information Technology, where the governments were there, and they were talking about technology and its uses, and we did an inaugural session on smart healthcare system and smart healthcare ecosystem. I would like to give the example of Bangladesh. Only a few years ago, Bangladesh was like, just upcoming, very sort of struggling developing country. And now it's one of the leading countries in that, in its group of countries that has taken up simple technology, simple solutions in technology. So we are not talking about holograms or very complex type of technology. They use the technology, simple smartphones or ordinary text phones in setting up networks. And so I think we should go back to the basic question: what is the problem we want to solve? In healthcare, we want to solve the disease. First of all, we want to promote well-being, so prevent people from getting ill. And once they are ill, to make a rapid diagnosis and treat them and get them well. Right? That is the bottom line, that is the question. How can technology help that? Is then you work towards that and say, okay, this technology fits into this problem, this can help me in gathering. It's not just about data. It's about the whole patient journey from well-being to becoming ill to becoming well. And then you look at, okay, what are your options in technology? Where does that fit in? So it doesn't have to be a very expensive solution that the developing country cannot choose. It's the smart thinking of what can help a disease process or a population health in addressing its challenges. I have another point, but I'll come back, but otherwise I'm hounding you.
Thank you. Raul?
So I actually want to add that in some ways the first world is sort of similar in that you almost have to, like the way I would approach a problem like this is I would start all the way from the beginning, pick a disease and say, okay, how is this patient even recognized in the first place? Who do they see? What is the following stuff that what are the following testing that they get? How often should they be seen? And where is the deviation between what should be done and what's happening? And then try to find where there's an opportunity to do something about it and keep on sort of going through all the steps and saying, who's gonna stop you from doing that? What do you have to do to make that happen? And the more that you're able to sort of fit this in a comprehensive way, the more likely it's gonna get adopted. The challenge is that some of those solutions are really boring, and they're logistical solutions. And so if you're trying to get a job in a computer science department or you're trying to get promoted, it may often be that there's a mismatch between the sort of the problem that needs to be solved from an algorithmically interesting standpoint and the very dull logistical solution that's needed for something like this. And sometimes you can find a mismatch. I mean, I often look for sometimes these things to align because then everybody wins. And the same thing with biology too. I mean, I think you watch biology keep on switching. You know, Bart mentioned that people keep on wanting to do more and more technically, they want to do 4D MRI. They're bored with doing 2D echo, but 2D echo will have a whole lot more impact. In the same way, biologists don't want to do things that have maybe been recognized in the 1990s. They want to have the latest kind of the exosomes, the circular RNAs. There's all of these things because that's the novelty there is what's kind of exciting and will get you promoted and get you a high-profile paper. So this mismatch, unfortunately, we're stuck with it. But I do think that even from the standpoint of let's leave aside the sort of the research glory. From the standpoint of being able to change the system, you kind of have to just spell it all out in very gory details as to how things happen for you to find those places where some failings are happening in the first place.
Good, listen. I'd like to ask if someone has any example of, I don't know, a private company working with a hospital or healthcare provider and dealing with this data management and privacy issue in a good way and providing added value. Maybe among the audience. Well, okay, Enrique, and then Alan.
I am not going exactly to answer you, but I will say that, I mean, of course, the issue of data protection now and the schizophrenic situation we are having in which the patients, they want to donate everything, especially in the case of rare diseases, because there are no solutions. They will give their data to be used by any company, and the strong data protection regulation we are having makes that we are starting a bit to miss the focus of the problems, no? So I believe that it should be the healthcare systems and the authorities responsible of the health of the citizens to drive the car and to set up, okay, which are the priorities, which are the elements that are needed, because I have the impression that with artificial intelligence we can end up as we are in the situation of the pharmaceutical industry developments, in which we are having orphan areas, because the industry is not interested, actually, because it's not a business. And then if we are ending up in artificial intelligence and having, again, orphan areas, could be, for example, in the case of low-income countries, that's an orphan area. They will not invest, not because it's not possible, but because they are not having revenue. I think that that should be, and for that we will need the right questions. We need the questions coming from the clinicians and the artificial, and from the policymakers. And the artificial intelligence should be adapted. The engineers should develop the machine in this direction. So, of course, the private industry and the companies should have the capacity of doing that, but that should be a bit adapted to the needs and not the other way around.
Good, thanks, Enrique. And Alan?
Thank you. I don't know the answer to your question. I just wanted to quote two examples, and Bart might know a little more than I do. The University Hospital in Leuven, which is one of the biggest teaching hospitals in the north of Europe, where I'm a visiting professor, they have now signed a contract for their clinical data management system for the hospital with Google, for the whole hospital clinical system. And in that hospital, I also know that they have a new version of their software every Monday morning, and the hospital estimates that they run 100,000 different processes on computers in the hospital. So you see the scale of the problem and the potential interaction with a company. I have asked them and been told that they've thought about the legal issues. I haven't seen the contract. I don't know the details, but I'm going to ask them the next time after this discussion when I'm visiting the hospital again. And the patients do give consent on admission to the hospital for their data to be used for audit and clinical research. But whether that states that this is a link with Google or not, I don't know. Bart, can you add to that? Or
I don't know.
You agree with what I've said? I think it's correct, what I was just saying.
I think it's correct indeed. I don't know the details, but one of the things is that you partially have to separate the data itself, and the other thing is the infrastructure needed to handle that data.
Yeah.
Because traditionally within the hospital, it would be the informatics department that would put a computer there, which would have the storage. But then one of the things that you see is then actually there needs to be a backup, which have to be at another site, which is very often at a site of a university or somewhere else. So already physically that data can be somewhere else. So what I think is the deal is that you sign a contract with a company like Google to provide the data infrastructure, but the data itself is highly likely encrypted,
Yeah.
and highly likely there's a lot of legal and even technical things involved that Google doesn't access the data, but they manage the bits itself and the CPUs that are needed in order to do these processes. Because actually, I'm pretty convinced that Google is much safer than many of the hospital information systems, because they have the latest technology, they have the best trained engineers and things like that. So I think it makes a lot of sense there. And actually, when you can look at it in some other ways also, like it's clear that companies like Apple, for example, what they do is they run a lot of their software on infrastructure from Amazon. And obviously, it's going to be in a way that Amazon has absolutely no access to the data of Apple, but they provide the infrastructure in a very controlled, legal, and very highly likely quite encrypted way. So I think this is the way forward.
Thank you, that's useful. And I wanted to mention finally that I'm aware of an academic lawyer in the university in Leuven who has a PhD student looking at legal aspects of big data from the clinical perspective now as well in healthcare. So I think it's an area where insight is developing and we don't know the answers. You're quite right to raise it.
Yeah, it's being developed. We actually have one person from the audience who want to add something, and also Clarissa afterwards. I'd like you to introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Ollie Smith. I work for Telefonica Alpha here in Barcelona, and I'm the strategy director in the Health Moonshots. And I can give you a real example of working with a hospital, because we have one. We are working with a mental health hospital in the NHS in the UK, and we have accessed anonymized health records to understand whether we can actually predict mental health crisis, which we can do. We can actually do that 2 weeks ahead with pretty good accuracy, sort of 75–80% accuracy. And I think three things have been really important in making that work. So one is the contracting and making sure that that's all absolutely nailed down. So the hospital spent a lot of time ensuring that the data was anonymized and getting people to look at that. We have a secure VPN that we access that through, and they can shut it down any time. And of course, they monitor every single thing we're doing. And if there's something that is flagged as going wrong, then it just comes down. So it's very, very tightly held. And of course, the fact that it's historic and anonymized as well is really important. The second thing in that work that was really important as well is the predictive algorithm. We talked to the clinicians about how they wanted that to work, and we're not using any deep learning. We're not using any neural networks because we couldn't explain it. And they really wanted that to be explained, which is totally fair, totally reasonable for the clinicians to want that. So we said, okay, that's fine. We will use, actually we ended up using something called XGBoost, which is much more kind of tree-based approach. And that's actually worked really well, and we can explain it. And then the third, I think most interesting, was this is done as research. So the hospital, which is a kind of research center as well, obviously was talking to the patient groups they have there. And what do you think about this? He said, yeah, we kind of thought you were doing this sort of thing already. What do you mean you're only just researching it now? Can you hurry up? So it is possible to do it, but you do have to spend the time with the hospital to make sure that all those things are in place. You've got to talk to clinicians, you've got to talk to the patients, and of course you've got to do the legal stuff. It takes time, but it's worth it.
Just out of curiosity, was this a hospital initiated or was this company initiated?
We didn't get individual consent for the patients for that data because it was anonymized. And so because it was then anonymized, well, we don't know who you are. And the Caldecott Guardian for the hospital said, okay, we think because this is based on anonymous data, we think it's okay. So they went through that.
No, I'm not sure neither, but I think there has to be some consent on the hospital side, which probably covers it. If their lawyers are happy with it, then probably it's
as you would say, the patients have consented to their data being used for research purposes for the hospital.
Exactly.
So that's something that happens as standard. But what they haven't done, to be clear, is they haven't consented to this specific research study. Yeah. So that's clear. I think maybe you're probably better.
Just an officially appointed representative of patients to ensure data protection and personal security of information in the healthcare system.
And to answer your question, I think the hospital was already doing this, and they were looking for a technology partner, and they looked at a few, and we were the ones that won out in the end.
Okay.
Yeah. Clarissa?
Yeah, first commenting about Google and the relationship with hospital. In 26th of June, there has been the news that Google, the University of Chicago, and the hospital in Chicago has been sued because of privacy issues. They were sharing data with Google, with doctor notes, and with stamps, data stamps, and they are now sued because of that. So because Google is an important and we can say industry that take care of data, doesn't mean that they know everything that is related to patient security or privacy. So there are still issues that need to be solved.
I think there's the big difference between data exchange and services for technology.
Yes, that's
these
completely
have to be,
different.
unfortunately, is in the same companies, which you can ask yourself whether that's ethical or not.
Yeah.
But I think that's another question. That's more for competition regulation.
Yeah, and related to that is like how successful stories about collaboration of hospitals and companies, the ones that I know, are those companies that are working very close to the hospitals, are almost part of the hospitals. And in that sense, we can say all these problems of privacy are a bit lower because they are almost part of the hospitals, and they know all the regulations behind it. But it's still difficult to find good relationships between them, and I think it's difficult because the responsibility of the privacy part falls too much into, well, they try to send the ball on the other person roof. We can say like, okay, it's the hospital needs to be responsible of the privacy, then they are going to do it, they block it. But of course, in that blocking everything doesn't allow this innovation to enter. And if it falls in the company, of course, then the hospital is not happy. So we have to find a way that we are not blocking each other, that we are being open, but still thinking together to protect the patient and the privacy.
Ursula?
Yes, I just wanted to follow up on what you just said. I think it's also important that we do not forget to better understand what patients actually think about this and how we can enable patients to become, to have a certain level of health literacy in the realm of electronic issues like AI and digital and so forth. So we have to strengthen patients and make them able to understand what is actually going to happen with their data. What if we want educated and empowered patients, then we have to think about how do we get to that point? How do we support them? How do we enable them to really understand what's going on? And I think that's something we should also not overlook. It's not just a regulatory issue. It's not just about who has to take care of the data, is Google allowed to do this or that, but also it's about patients who decide if they want to share their data or if they do not want to share the data. And I think the real problem is that people have lost trust, I think, in the internet, so to say, and in tech companies. I know at the same time we all freely share a lot of data that maybe we shouldn't share, but still, I mean, if you ask people, I mean, surveys show that people have lost trust in tech companies. And the result could be that people opt against data sharing, health data sharing, and then, I mean, that has a strong impact on big data and data collection. If patients stop sharing their data, then we have a problem. So if we want people to share their data, then we have to, I think, train them to be health literate and have a certain degree of e-health literacy.
Maybe also, partially related to this, what's the opinion about auditability? Because in some ways, and actually you mentioned the system in Leuven, but what you see there, for example, it's a relatively open electronic record system within the hospital, which means that every physician can access every patient data, but if that patient is not allied to that clinician at that moment in some kind of contact, the system asks, okay, give me the reason. And the reason is being locked. You still get access because it can be an emergency or things like that. But the main thing is that it's auditing. So for example, then as a patient, you can imagine your data of the patient is governed by the government or whichever. You say, click, 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 these companies can get access, and you can see who actually, at which time, for whatever reason, kind of access the data, which is in a way the auditability of the systems. And this is something that you don't often hear, but I don't know whether there's anything in regulation, whether there's any kind of thoughts about how this is important and how we actually could try to implement this.
I would echo this on what I heard from the French government, and it's also happening in other governments. They try now to centralize the data from the social security system. It's not just imaging data from hospital or like the broader perspective. And they try to actually officialize these kind of data access. And their idea normally is to have like an application to a given, as you submit project, you submit an application to process a given amount of data with a given purpose, even for companies, and they would like, and the data is as kind of bunker with controlled access, and you can only process the data while you're inside this place. And somebody in the audience asked to the regulators, but what if people just like try to trick the system, how to control the system, this issue? And there was like an opaque answer to it, a bit what you said. It falls under the law, but then, I mean, it's still ambiguous, so.
Well, if no one wants to add something on this, I will switch to the next question. Yeah? Someone else?
Oh, I just wanted to add to the debate that we are having, or discussion we are having around the ethics of things. So first of all, this is a common question that, or point that people get confused around that. What's the difference between ethical argument or a moral argument or a legal argument? So, just to clarify that legal, we are all very clear that there is a legislation that sits behind. Moral is a personal understanding, and ethical is what is allowed by the overriding body that you represent. For example, medical ethics, the group of doctors will decide. I don't know whether bankers have any ethics, but it should be, around there, or any group of people that are around. So when we were having this discussion, who decides about the ethics around these disruptive technologies, I think it should be the community of practice, which is Lev and Wenger's situated learning theory. In adult education theory, this is, the people who are around in the particular learning or application, they become a community of practice. So let's say we are talking about healthcare, use of technology in healthcare, then the engineers or the technology experts and the clinicians should become involved in deciding what is ethically right or wrong. But again, and the last point I want to make on this is, everything can be argued in ethics, because I teach medical ethics, so I'm just putting this forward so for understanding that there are different frameworks that you use. So if I'm an egalitarian, I'll be, looking for equality, or if I'm a utilitarian, I will think, okay, what is the best utility? If I use the Beauchamp and Childress pillars of ethics, that means fairness and justice and, no harm and, doing good, then I would say, I want to follow something because it clarifies or it supports justice for all. But on the other hand, if I've got a limited resource and I want to just, treat the one group of patients, then is that fair? So what I'm trying to say is the same argument can be ethically right or ethically wrong. For example, I have a serious issue with whether European Union should be spending its money on rare diseases when 300 million women die of childbirth every year, right? So this is my sort of look at it, but I'm sure they can ethically maybe, justify that, okay, because this is a problem in particular areas and they want to focus it and the money is coming from that particular area, hence it's justified. So the same argument can be debated in various different ways. So I think as a society, as a global society, we need to decide what are our priorities. You know, are our priorities things that will do good for all or do good for certain areas or certain populations?
That is a massive challenge to decide globally what are our priorities in a very multicultural world. Alan.
This is just a very brief answer to one of the points that you raised. The book that I mentioned about artificial intelligence by a lawyer has a very nice review of all the codes for managing data in non-health sectors, including banking and economics and everything else. So they do have their codes.
Do they follow?
Well, that's a completely separate issue. But you will find a very nice detailed review of all of them in that book if you want to look at it.
I lost a lot of money.
It's about thinking, it's not about
So related to everything, of course, that we have been talking until the moment, until now, is the next question, which is how will AI impact healthcare? And I was thinking about what Alfredo said before, is that hospitals are not even managing data science in a proper way, so not even ready to talk about AI. So can we talk about how AI will impact healthcare? And how? Yeah. But I think Alfredo might want to answer something.
Yeah, I mean, artificial intelligence in one way or another, in the form of machine learning or whichever other way, it's obviously going to have some impact in one way or another on healthcare systems. But I insist, I mean, it's like, I mean, my feeling all the time is like we are building the house from the I mean, without foundations. I mean, from the roof. It might make sense. It might make sense in niche areas, etc. Maybe even in countries with restricted means. I mean, you can always find issues and things that can have an impact, a positive impact, even in those kind of restricted situations. But the point is, without solid foundations on how to deal with data science and its application in the healthcare system, and something that is kind of agreed upon. I mean, because the point is that, I mean, we can discuss forever, but the point is that I find problems in which, you know, a hospital has two machines for the same thing. One was bought, I don't know, 5 years ago, and some other guy bought it 3 years ago. One of them is General Electric, the other is Siemens. And they don't even have a common format for the data. So doctors may spell radiologists, for instance. I mean, people are talking a lot about radiologists here. Might find that they cannot even make an homogeneous data set because formats are incompatible. I mean, things like that. So if we don't have even those things even half solved, yeah, I mean, of course, artificial intelligence may have an impact, and even a positive one on the healthcare system as a whole, if someone more or less agrees, if a health system or, I don't know, a country or a Ministry of Health or something agrees on something in a proper framework to deal with it. But I mean, before that, we need a framework to deal with data science at large. I mean, that's my...
Thanks, Alan. Sorry. Alan, did you want to add something?
Thank you. Just to address one specific point of the question that you've raised, there's another major fallacy here. Almost nothing that we do in medicine makes health cheaper. Because if we allow people to live longer, then the vast majority of health expenditure is in the last 3 months of life when people are elderly in intensive care. And unless we couple health interventions with the decision not to use healthcare at all when we're older, but to accept that we have a mortality and that we want care, but not high-tech care in the hospital, then almost nothing that we do actually saves costs. We increase costs in looking after very sick old people with multiple morbidities. So that's the wrong question. The question is, will it improve health, not will it make health cheaper?
Maybe just commenting on that, is Raoul's perspective the same? Because the US funding system is and costs is very different compared to the European one. Can you cut costs?
Yeah,
in
so
the
one of
US?
the things that's interesting is that the typical individual will only stay with a given insurance carrier for about 2 years. So they have a 2-year time horizon, and if they can't realize value within that, they're generally uninterested. There's none of that, oh, I will save money 10 years from now. But there are some things that are carried out from a guideline-based, you must do this no matter what. And we've sort of accepted that society should be doing this. You're not going to see a short-term economic benefit for yourselves, but this should still be done. And so there, you could imagine that you could achieve those aims at lower cost. It's not so much saying something about the total healthcare expenditure over the lifetime of an individual, just saying that I have to do this thing. I would like to do this thing for as low a cost and as high a quality as I can. And the last thing I want to add is the American system is so resistant to change that you almost have to meet both of those things simultaneously, or nothing's ever going to be adopted. It still remains to be seen, even if you do achieve both of those, whether they will get adopted. But if you have anything that reduces, everything just keeps on moving up in tandem with cost and quality to some degree. So if you improve cost, but at an expense of quality, the American system won't adopt it. They will just reject it outright. So you have to pull off both of those things for even having a chance.
Okay, Alan wanted to answer, and then Clarissa.
Just to put it in context, I'm sure you'll agree with this, Rahul, but the USA is on track to spend 25% of its gross domestic product on healthcare by 2030, which is completely unsustainable. And you may remember when Gro Harlem Brundtland, who was the ex-Prime Minister of Norway and the General Director of WHO, the WHO produced a very interesting league table of healthcare worldwide. And it was largely funded by major Western economies. There was only ever one edition of that because the USA threatened to withdraw their funding from WHO if they produced a second edition because it said that the US healthcare system was only the 10th best in the world or something. And that's because although they spend so much money and although their top-class medical care is absolutely superb, there are still uninsured people and there is still too much inequality of healthcare. So the issue is about equity of access from a European perspective, not about the best quality. Maybe you disagree with that, but I think that would be a common view amongst colleagues when I discuss this with them.
So I've seen tables where it's more like 39th in the world, and not. I think 10th would be. But I think that it is true that the high-end care is excellent. And the mentality there is, I'm speaking as a Canadian to some extent when I use words like there, but ultimately the mentality is you want to strive to be able to achieve the highest care, not bring the care to everybody. You want to just keep on kind of climbing over everybody else to be that person who gets it. And so that's the mentality is. It's also, if you look across the whole thing, that's where private schools get their attention. It's very much about moving yourself into that category that benefits, rather than thinking from a sort of a societal perspective.
Before Clarissa, I remember Enrique raised his hand.
Just coming back to the question of if artificial intelligence which could save money. I agree with you that in general more knowledge implies more cost, but I will say that depending on how you apply, as everything in medicine and in knowledge, the artificial intelligence, you could have a powerful tool, for example, to make better health technology assessment, to have much better post-commercial studies, because we were discussing during the lunch, for example, the new drugs in cancer, the real value they are providing is very, very, very low. And no one is studying that from this point of view. And we should take decision and choosing where we are going to invest the money. Artificial intelligence could have this value, but that will depend, of course, on who is, again, driving the car of artificial intelligence, where we are going to. And I don't know if the academy, in this case, and this is the academic environment, should take this responsibility to lead the car, and having, of course, the companies to develop the needed tools and the needed technology, but following this path a bit.
Clarissa.
Yeah, it's also related to that. I think that before knowing if we are going to make health cheaper or a higher quality, I think that there needs to be an investment from healthcare to embrace this and to make it part of their practice, or to make it part of like a department of AI in all hospitals should be there in order to make this technology accessible and to have an impact. So I think that before talking about it, can we make it cheaper, we have to see which investment we have to make it a reality. There is a big separation still between what is being done in healthcare, is doing in this university, the academic groups, and then we have the hospitals, and we are trying to solve the problems that are being in the hospitals. I think if we want to change the system, we have to become the system. I said that before, and I think that it needs to be, there needs to be a bigger investment on AI to have it incorporated in the hospitals and in healthcare.
Naila.
Yeah, very quickly. So in America and in the UK recently, there is a new role that has come out. I think in States it's been there for some time, which is you have a, CIO, which is the Chief Information Officer. So that is the role, which is a non-clinical one usually. And then they have a CCIO, so Clinical Chief Information Officer. And this is a new role for the NHS. So the basic idea behind is that clinicians who've got some insights into technology and understand that, okay, this is a clinical need and this is what technology can do, can they merge together? So that is the bridge between the two sides of discipline. But I would say that it's still new in the making and how we use it. And the other point is that I wouldn't say that AI, the department of AI in itself, because like we say, technology, AI is now. In 5 years' time, maybe it's something else. So I think it should be a broader umbrella of technology, because it can be something else.
Thanks.
I'm a PhD student here at Hospital Clinic. I have a question about this discrepancy between the technological possibilities and the real-life needs in medicine. It's actually a question, how much do professional societies which are focused on, so at least in cardiology, the ESC has a lot of subgroups, how much do they present the currently needed questions that need to be resolved as like something in the sense somebody today mentioned these challenges and stuff like this? Maybe it's a naive question, but could this help with the progress if a society demands we want to solve these 3 problems, and then there's like a 5-year plan of research heading in one maybe specific direction? Well, in every society, is this something that could help? It's a win-win situation with people, then the researchers might have their work realized and incorporated into something, and this is real life might benefit from it.
I can give a European perspective, and then Rahul can do an American one. I think it's an issue for the companies how they identify the key opinion leaders that they use in advising them and where they put their resources. And that can, in my experience, be slightly haphazard or chance. So I think you're absolutely right. There would be a role for a consensus from the academic community in setting challenges for artificial intelligence and machine learning experts to address within medicine. Whether that's done specifically or not, I'm not sure, but there are certainly discussions with industry, for example, in the Imaging Association of the ESC, and all the subspecialty communities such as electrophysiology and interventional cardiology have joint meetings with industry and industry roundtables. I was at a meeting recently with many senior people from European companies with the European Society of Cardiology talking about regulatory affairs and some of these questions. And the European Society of Cardiology has organized an e-health summit in Tallinn in October, which will address issues of artificial intelligence and machine learning as well. So certainly we're involved and we're getting more interested and more active. On the specific level of specific challenges like the MICAI challenges in artificial intelligence and so on, I'm not aware of anyone doing that yet, but it's something we should think about. Perhaps you want to volunteer to take it on.
So in the US, one of the big things, and I'm not sure if it's also the case in the rest of the world, is this heart failure rehospitalizations is like the buzzword that everybody talks about. So there's there's Kaggle competitions, there's various machine learning competitions for this. It's everything that's on everybody's mind. It's unclear if anyone has, so that's where you're getting data sets and machine learning interest, but I'm still skeptical that adoption will follow based on that, because the amount of, there's going to be this large mismatch between the model and the data and the practice of implementation, and that still is going to be, it's still going to hold people back. The one thing that was very interesting to me to see is that the first time I actually saw, so my institution is very interested in machine learning, not just because of inflated ego researchers, but actually Massachusetts decided that a few years back, I think it was almost 5 or 6 years back. So Massachusetts is sort of this famous experiment where the Republican governor, Mitt Romney, instituted a sort of a universal health care coverage for the state, shockingly. And the strategy was twofold. The first was we're going to gather everybody in, and the second is that after a certain amount of time, we're going to start penalizing you if you don't control costs. So there's now accountability at an institutional level to control costs, and now there's all kinds of interest, and there's things are actually happening where people are interested, investing internally, and making changes in terms of care and looking for artificial intelligence solutions if they're good enough to be able to do that. But until, so the sort of the answer I'm trying to get to is that if you don't have an institution that somehow owns financial risk end to end, it's very difficult to incentivize them to ever introduce anything. But as soon as they're on the hook, then they'll, the US is a pretty creative and enterprising and nimble place, provided there's real incentive to do so. And medicine is generally pretty fractured and broken, and there's not that incentive, but in some places there is, and you're starting to see a lot more innovation. Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, and JP Morgan got together because the cost of their employees are too high. And so there is innovation that's starting to happen, and people will bring these things in only because it hurts their bottom line. And you're going to see changes because of that. So I'm sort of both pessimistic for a lot of things, but optimistic around the ability for things to move quickly if there is some degree of sort of ownership at a financial level.
Question that basically you were saying that how do clinicians come forward to identify which areas that are needed for your for your input. So for that I think rather than reinventing the wheel, we have organizations like the WHO that spends lots of money in producing these global health data sets in identifying where the health challenges are. And also you have under the UN umbrella organizations like ITU, which is Information Technology Based Union or something, because I was involved in a conference which had the two together, and that was, I think, amazing, because the health people were talking, these are the top 10 health issues in the world, and the technology people were saying, okay, these are the solutions, and then how do we use them to, so that is a good forum to follow if you're looking for areas where the niche, where the needs are, if I understood your question right.
Well, the fourth question we had is also related to the whole thing we have been talking about. This morning, I think all the speakers, or almost all, were talking about AI not replacing doctors, or machine learning not replacing doctors, but helping them to decide. I'm not sure if everyone has the same view. Because there are new incorporations on the panel, and also I have listened different views during lunch related to this question, which are the biggest hurdles to overcome to get AI into clinical decision making for clinicians, for the industry, for regulators, for healthcare system. So first of all, do you all agree that AI is not gonna have the last choice? It's not gonna be the one deciding. It's gonna be always like a doctor or a professional of health. Alan, yeah? Okay. No, I won't.
I'll answer that. Okay, I'll answer that. That AI is simply like in the doctor's bag, you have stethoscope, thermometer, other things. Now we have AI as well.
Call it ML.
Yeah. Machine learning, yes, it's not AI, ML.
So yeah, I just want to say that regarding the question whether AI is going to replace doctors, I think we need to keep in mind that what we are already facing in some regions of the world, and what we will be facing even more in the coming decades, is a massive shortage of healthcare workers and trained medical personnel. So the question is perhaps not really whether AI will replace doctors, but whether we will be able to use AI in situations where doctors are just not available. Yeah. So I think it's not so much about replacing. But I do agree that the role of trained medical personnel will change. It will perhaps also be more of an information facilitator or something like that. But again, I think it's important to keep in mind that we will be facing a massive shortage in like healthcare workers, and that is at least an equally big problem, so to say.
That is a good insight. Rahul, I'd like to know your view on this.
So I think that the problem with the system I'm familiar with, and maybe everywhere, is that people are largely set in their ways, and any small piecemeal change will be met with considerable resistance because it's making more work. So one of the biggest hurdles is going to be, so then if you're in a place where there's nobody doing anything, then of course then you have a chance to be able to get incorporated more readily. But if you are going to do something within the context of an existing system, it's very difficult if all you're doing is solving a little bit of something. So you really, I think that the main thing is that the industry there's already somebody there to do all these tasks for the most part, let's say within a developed urban center. So how are you supposed to get something new into there? Because somebody already exists and somebody has liability for those things. And so you have to almost look for something that is otherwise undesired or not done and start there. Show your performance to at least match or maybe outperform whatever else is going on, and then slowly start moving your way over. But if you just try, and I think we've seen this again and again, people just try to sort of offer some little solution somewhere, and it just gets met with huge resistance because no one's gonna get paid anymore to do that. It's gonna take more time because you have to learn something that you don't even know how to do. It may disappear, and then they may switch it with something else the next year. So we've seen these things. I mean, these kinds of things with new HRs. There's been a number of digital improvements that have been introduced over the last 10 years that in general have caused people to be angry and hate them. So you have to figure out something that is kind of comprehensive that makes life better. And that means you have to understand what makes, what are the failures in the current system.
But as you said before, people has to have incentives. So if you say to doctors, then if you use this system, you won't have to do this repetitive and boring task. So it will take a bit of time for you to learn, but afterwards you will be free to do this thing. So it will be better for you. You will enjoy more your work. It's not like proper way to do this.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with that is that many of those things we're already very quick at, and we still have the liability for it. So I think about a radiologist, right? So there's certain things that, okay, maybe we'll put a better example. I think one of the things that nobody's ever mentioned here is that we've had automated EKG interpretation for 50 years. So nobody measures those things anymore. It's all done by the machine. GE's algorithms, that's the one that we use, has been around for probably 25, 30 years or so. They're pretty good at these things for the most part. There may be some things that, when it's a high stakes decision, you're definitely gonna overread it. But otherwise, if it's just populating fields in measuring various things, you're really not going to repeat that yourself. So, but the problem is that let's say it takes a radiologist probably 2 minutes to read a chest X-ray, and it's difficult for me to imagine a system where somebody else reads it and they're on the hook for liability for whatever that interpretation is without them reading it again, and it's going to take them the same amount of time. So it's going to be difficult for certain tasks that already exist to swap something out. So the kind of things people talk about are kind of boring. They're like, okay, if I have a stack of 100 X-rays to read, the system will order them in a way that maybe identifies the highest acuity person first. So these are the kind of things people are talking about as being where the innovations will be. Triaging within something, but you still have to do them all anyways at some point. And maybe overnight you'll have, in an understaffed area, you'll have a chance to do something, but still you're gonna have to read it later on. So it's a little bit sad that we already have somebody to do all of these things, and so it is not gonna be easy simply and they're gonna be, their name is on the line for liability. So it's gonna be hard to replace them altogether.
So if we know, I'm sorry, I will give the word to Enrique and Alan, but I will ask something else. If we know what is the problem, then what is the solution?
So I think the solution in my mind is to not try to replicate the things that are already being done relatively efficiently with high stakes decisions to be made. Stay away from that. Look for the things that are tedious, that are not being done, that are not rewarded, that are not being, you can't bill for, and start there. And then as you start there, you have to get over that initial hump and make your, plant your flag in there, and then you can start to move outwards. If you can demonstrate quality and value and reduce burnout for physicians, which is a very big problem in the US, and if you can start to do those things, and it's not flashy, but if you can start to do those things, you're going to start to get traction, I believe, in doing some of those other things that are going to be ultimately maybe a little bit more ambitious, but you already will have got that sort of buy-in.
Thanks. First, Enrique. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not looking at the audience.
His question was answered already.
The question was partially answered by Raul, because I will try to link to Ursula about the lack of physicians, of doctors. So I think the AI will increase the burnout of doctors in the future. So unless some measures will take before this happens. This is a provocative question, maybe.
Quickly.
I always like to be provoked. So actually, you're right that physician burnout is an epidemic, especially in America, and now catching on in the UK. And was it Miss Dr. Gwande, Atul Gwande, who'd written a very good article published in the New York Times about how EMRs are literally, killing physicians and burning them out. But I kind of differ from that in a way that, and actually have blogged on it as well, that it's about how you use the technology. So we can't say generally that AI is going to add to the burnout of physicians. If it is not used properly, again we come to the same thing: the type of AI solution for which problem, used by who, in the right circumstances. So it's like, antibiotics. If you give to everyone, you are going to create a big problem. But if you choose your patient selection, then it is going to benefit the patient. Same thing applies here. Sorry.
Okay, Enrique, Alfredo, I don't know if Alan wanted to comment as well. Yeah.
Yeah, just to say that probably we are talking about artificial intelligence, and that involves many, many different approaches. No, one approach probably could be to avoid these repetitive tasks, and for that I think that everyone understands there is no problem. But I would say that the artificial intelligence should be useful to generate evidence. For that we will need quality data, which is the problem. The main problem. So now we are still on the basics, no? Because probably the artificial intelligence used that it's based on quality set of data that are just in research databases could be very good. But if we are talking about the hospital clinical records, electronic records data, we are far from the solution. We have problem of interoperability, we have problem of codification, we have the problem that hospital data are generated and the coding basically for reimbursement aims and not to identify clinical problems. So first we have to solve all these small issues, which are not easy to solve, and then we can start to do these kind of things. I will say that in general, artificial intelligence could be also used actually to trigger more work for the clinicians instead of substituting the clinicians. For example, genetic testing. You can send your blood or your smear to United States and you will receive a very nice set of possible risks related with your genetic origin. And of course, you will go to visit your doctor immediately with this, even if it's a false negative, even if it's not clinically relevant. So that will depend, no? That will depend.
Alan and Alfredo, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I wanted to address the question in a different way from how you phrased it at the start of this discussion, and that is to look at it in general. And again, try and be a little provocative. I would answer this question by saying that the biggest hurdle is by phrasing the question like this. And let me explain why that is. Because this assumes, the way it's written, that we have to get AI into clinical decision-making. It's the same in regulatory circles, and we see this particularly with political pressures on regulators in Europe and in the FDA, that all you have to do to criticize them is to say they're against innovation. Innovation is always good, but it's not. It can be bad as well as good, or it can be based on evidence or not based on evidence. It's the same with artificial intelligence. This question should be, what are the biggest hurdles to improve clinical decision-making, and how can AI help, or what should it do to help? And then you ask companies not to tell us they've got a tool that we've got to use, but they have to be directed to think about what they can do that will help clinicians. It's what everyone is saying, but phrasing the question like this turns it upside down, and really it should come from the clinical priority first.
Thanks, Alfredo.
Oh, sorry. I couldn't agree more. Bravo. It's another situation in which you're putting the cart in front of the horse. I mean, that's exactly the way that question should be phrased. Well, that's one thing. Then going back to the burnout question and what you were saying about, I mean, it's absolutely right. I mean, there are I mean, healthcare and medical care. It's so broad, and there are lots of niche problems for which, I mean, artificial intelligence might actually help and actually avoid burnout. And one of them is precisely the automatic analysis of electronic health record. Okay? If you have an NLP system, a natural language processing system, working behind based on machine learning, okay, giving doctors a kind of high-level abstraction, high-level kind of guidelines about that come out of having analyzed thousands or tens of thousands of electronic health records, something a doctor will never do, of course, hasn't have to do. I mean, that could be not only valuable, but it could also actually help doctors precisely avoiding they have to do that sort of task, going through the electronic health records, all the notes, etc. And with natural language processing, and the doctor doesn't even need to be aware that there is any artificial intelligence, machine learning, NLP behind. I mean, the only thing the doctor gets is just this kind of high-level abstract that can help, hopefully. Right? So, I mean, there are points in which, even without talking about machine learning or artificial intelligence or anything, you can provide things which should help that and other problem, which is somehow related to burnout, which is also de-skilling. That has also been mentioned before. You know, I mean, people are worried about de-skilling doctors if you introduce artificial intelligence replacing their tasks. If you do it properly, you don't need to de-skill the doctor or the nurse or whoever. You can actually upskill it somehow, because of data awareness or data science awareness or things like that, if you do it properly.
Yeah, a question from, and if you could introduce yourself, please.
Can you hear me? Yes. So my name is Aline Kossi-Gantner. I'm working for Fondation Botnar with Ursula. I'm responsible for the research, the monitoring and evaluation. So my question is actually, can we also think about what could AI do more in a preventive aspect? Because if we come to the clinical decision making, maybe it's quite late. And we are in discussion with the Clalit Institute in Israel. And actually, they do a lot because they have all their patients, 4.5 million people record and all the medical histories. They do a lot of data mining and modeling, and actually they come to a very good health outcome in diabetes type 2 in a preventive way. So I think maybe here there is a huge potential that we could exploit more. What do you think about it?
Good, Naila.
So I'm very passionate. Thank you very much for asking that question, because this is one of my favorite topics, that when we talk about healthcare, immediately the thing that comes to mind is disease. So how many people actually are diseased, while as compared to how many are generally well and not diseased? So thankfully we are living in a world that not everyone is diseased, although mental illness, everyone's affected by stress, I would argue. But we should, in my opinion, should be aiming towards a model or a health ecosystem. Ecosystems are very sort of popular buzzwords. Everyone's talking about that, and there are various different definitions of eco. Everything that needs to be, ideal for the best outcomes, is an ecosystem. And in a health ecosystem, you start from well-being. Now, where would your question, which alludes to how can we use, first of all, we should focus on the wellness, which I totally agree on. And I would propose an ecosystem, which we start off from birth till demise, where every part of the body, every phase in life has got the best outcomes embedded in that system. That how can technology help in maintaining that, wellness? So an example of your artificial intelligence and, showing it that it's not necessarily that always leads to burden, physician burden. If there is a system, let's say I'm well, but I'm prone to diabetes because I like a cone in the night every night. That's my, some people would like a glass of wine. I like to have an ice cream. So obviously I'm heading towards pre-diabetic or diabetic stage. I go to the hospital for some other issue, and while the doctor is looking at my other tests, the artificial intelligence embedded in the system pops up an alert, you call it, or whatever it's called, or a clinical decision support tool or whatever. It pops up and says, patient's blood glucose this, would you like to consider blah, blah, and blah. Or you're about to prescribe someone an antibiotic, which the system recognizes that the GFR or renal function was actually, not right, and it is actually contraindicated in this particular patient. So the alert will go up and will say, have you noticed that the renal function is so and so? So can you see, when NHS sees 1 million patients every 36 hours. My clinic, although it's not ideal, but I see 40 patients in cancer patients, out of which, you have to make very complicated. I have support, but still there is a lot of turnover. In those busy situations, if a system gives me an alert, a signposts me something, it will prevent a preventable harm to occur to a patient. So I'm all for it, right? So how does that burden me? I don't understand. The burden is when I have to log in 10 times into different softwares to get access to my patient data. Yeah? What I want is one fingertip like this Mac, although it's American and I take, but I put my...
China.
Yeah, I have access, with that as well. So I put my finger and it's logged on. All my, windows are open. So that is where it can help.
Clarissa?
So a couple of things. So when I brought up burnout, I wasn't going to suggest that AI causes burnout. I think the idea was that the case that is being made, hopefully, is that this is supposed to get rid of those tedious tasks that are automatable, and it's supposed to improve physician well-being. That's the hope. But getting back to the point that was made here, we actually have in our system all these decision support, but they're largely ignored. And one of the reasons is because they, in some sense, don't go far enough. So they'll just point something out, but you're getting almost like alarm fatigue, where you're getting these, oh, you should have done this, but they don't put the order in for you. They don't do all of those next steps. And so there's almost this inertia and feeling of being nagged that is there, where they're not taking it off your plate. They're almost feeling like they're adding things onto your plate. So we have all these things already built in. So and so is due for such and such task. I mean, those things we already get all of those reminders right now. I don't think the uptake is all that great, and I think it's because it's not, it's adding until all of those things are in some sense automated. There's almost like the whole process happens without so-and-so having to sort of put the order in and follow it up in such and such and make sure that the patient gets the lab drawn, and all those kind of tedious things end up being in some sense the resistance to this being done. But one more place. I mean, I think one of the things that doesn't get done in our system. So there's well-known cardiovascular risk guidelines that are out there. And when we started looking at our system, only about half of the people even had the testing done to be able to do that. So we've built a model off a simple $3 blood test that at least so far outperforms anything out there in the typical, where you have to order 5 or 6 different things and enter all these things. So it's trying to make it's a much simpler and convenient machine learning model off a much more conveniently ordered test that is done at a much higher rate. So maybe that kind of thing will be useful to be able to identify cardiovascular risk. Though I still think that we're going to have to do some of those. You got to keep it going. You got to do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, because otherwise you start hitting people with a, hey, here's a flag for you, and people don't want flags. They want solutions, and so I think that's one of the problems is this sort of the decision support I think has been around for 15 years, and it is a burden in people's minds. It's a nag and a burden rather than a solution.
Okay, now we'll come with Clarissa, Nicola, and Alan, and maybe a few other questions from the public. Yeah, I said that. Yeah.
So for me, I'm going to be a bit controversial here. Okay, I think I know that of course there is going to create a burden for the doctors when all these flags appear and all the decision makers are there, where you have to all this system that you have to log in, and I think. Yeah, it's true. I think that the one thing that we are doing in my group especially is like every time that we create an algorithm that tries to help us solve a task, we also think about how we are going to incorporate this. So we not only spend time on creating this beautiful architecture that really solves the problem, but also we spend time creating workstation or workflows that can be incorporated in the clinic. But of course, we also become in a problem that we have to collaborate, or we have to work with other type of companies. For example, the company that creates the images, or the vendors, the company that have the IT in the hospital. So it's a big effort that we are doing, and it's not doing research at the end. We are doing a bit of engineering to how to bring that there. Saying this, I think that the doctors also it's their responsibility not to just wait and sit and say like, hey, give me what I need, and I'm not going to like what you are giving because this is creating me a burden. It's also from them to try to adopt, trying to criticize in a constructive way and say like, okay, we need this, I want to use it, but we need to change this. And I think that now they are in a way that they are just sitting, waiting for us to react and provide solutions and say, no, this is not what we like. They are still there, like you said, for many years. But nobody said like, hey, let's change it. I would like to have it like this and this and this. So I think that there needs to be a movement of both sides to a middle point. And I think that that's the effort that we have to make.
So,
yeah. Nicola.
Yeah, as a complement to both discussion of from you and Raul, was maybe it's just we have to learn how to cope with uncertainties and not just waiting for a given decision that is binary, or waiting for that simple decision, so from the clinical side, or from the engineering side, just bringing a simple answer, just trusting the data we've received and ignoring the rest of the data. So if I had to answer this, and it links to all the other answers that were done, in my opinion, one of the biggest hurdles is how to learn to cope with this uncertainty that exists. And actually, as doctors, you're quite good at this, but very subjectively. So that's the art of dealing with uncertainty, but in a in a kind of subjective way. So,
Alan, please.
Firstly, a brief comment for Nicola. I agree, that's what we do, and actually I would say that's the biggest challenge about implementing AI is actually, or improving the quality of care here, is about teaching ourselves to think better and to use AI appropriately rather than because we have to use it because it's there. I just wanted to comment briefly on the question about prevention, and just to say that I think I would support artificially intelligent or machine learning tools for preventive healthcare if you have evidence that they make a difference. Because otherwise, I can see that they would cause many more problems. There is an issue about early diagnosis without evidence if we just medicalize the whole population, because all of us will have something if you look hard enough. And do you want to convert everyone from birth to death into patients? Personally, I suspect not. And that before you think about doing that, going back to Medical Nemesis published by Ivan Illich in the 1960s, we have to be very careful that we don't do it unless there's evidence. Because if you want to improve health for primary prevention, political issues are sometimes more effective, such as putting up the price of tobacco, which reduced smoking more than advising patients that it was harmful for their health. So it's not simply that because there might be a tool we need to implement it. We can only, again, even for primary prevention, do it with evidence, in my opinion.
Thanks. It's 5:05. I'd like to give the opportunity for one more question in the audience, if there's one more question. Otherwise, I will ask to each of you briefly, maybe one sentence to give your own conclusion of today's conference, your main conclusion or your main statement. So is there any question among the public? The audience? No? Okay. Then who would like to start with the conclusions? Nicola, okay?
So as I don't have so much time to think about the question, I'd say with this we have work for many years and we won't actually lose our jobs instantly.
So I would suggest that clinicians and healthcare professionals need to understand machine learning now and what it can do, and machine learning engineers and informatics specialists should work very closely with clinicians to define the problems they should be addressing.
For me, I would say that it's our responsibilities from the medical and technical community to make this AI science fiction in reality. And I think it's something that we have to work together, not provide separated solution or walk independent paths.
I would say that all stakeholders who are involved in delivery of healthcare should keep patient-centeredness at the heart of anything that they are doing, whether it is developing or implementing a solution, or so it should not be just commercial. I mean, financial viability is important, but it shouldn't be just financial driven. Patient outcomes and well-being should be at the heart of it.
So I want to say that I think the field needs some quick wins to be able to work for patients and providers and payers, because I think if we spend too long and keep on trying for things that we have no hope of having impact on, then we're going to start getting shut down in terms of issues around data. So we need to show that we have some value soon. Otherwise, I think that there's a real threat to being able to continue in this field.
Yep. As I have said before, I mean, artificial intelligence or machine learning, machine learning and medicine have been in a kind of weird marriage from 20, 30 years ago. For me, what makes things really interesting now is, this debate, for instance, this workshop, wouldn't have happened 20 years ago. The amount of very interesting issues that have come up in this meeting tell me that, things are happening in a very different way right now. So that makes it somehow exciting. And I think a key issue here is that we need, I don't know exactly how, but we need to find a shared language between the medical experts and the machine learning expert or data science expert. Without that common language, that common understanding, is going to be very difficult to get things really done.
I will say that artificial intelligence should demonstrate that it's a disruptive innovation from the positive point of view and not a burden, not a new economic burden.
Well, I think what I found most striking, perhaps, is that despite all the differences between high-income and low-income countries, there's one clear similarity, and I think that came out quite a few times today, and that is the application of AI in healthcare should not be driven by the technology itself and by our enthusiasm about technological innovation, but it should be driven by clear needs and local conditions and necessities and requirements.
Thanks so much. Oh, yes,
if I
thank you.
can do just my reflection. So I think that at the end of the day, what I envision for medicine in 5-10 years, with the help of machine learning, is that in the end it will help us having more personalized, data-driven kind of objective in a way. So it will put the objectivity from data acquisition, so it will help standardize the acquisition of images, of lab tests, of everything. And then, of course, it will need to engage. In the end, there will be a symbiosis between clinicians and these machine learning tools, because, as they said, at the end of the day, it's just a tool that they have in their bag of tools, like the same as stethoscope, or so they will, in the end, it will be a symbiosis between clinicians and these kind of tools. And I think that's, from my point of view, the future of medicine.
Emilia or Bart would want to add something, their own conclusions?
No, the thing is, well, my conclusion is, and partially some of the other speakers, especially Raul, has mentioned that also, it's like, I think the research we now need to do is try to understand the workflows in clinical practice and try to understand how decision-making is being made. And that's where we can try to match it with the tools and the approaches we have. And I think this is a big burden, or a big gap in some ways. It's like there's a huge amount of money going into technology, there's a huge amount of money going into data acquisition, but almost nobody is doing research on decision-making processes. Workflows are only now starting to be investigated, again, because of the money. And this, I think, is the gap that partially closes it. And this gives us also common language by saying, look, this is our problem, this is the way that we solve it. Okay, where can we help?
Emilia?
Yeah, and I wanted to maybe wrap up all that has been said. I think with the need for interdisciplinary and also for this idea of ecosystem and all stakeholders involved in a common goal. Also, I like the idea of prioritization and what should be the problem we should all tackle. And also the idea that was brought about, we have to act together and also soon to at least to reveal the impact, the positive impact that this technology may have in healthcare, and not to get into this negative perception now of the negative side of it. No, so nothing is very good or is very bad. It's only how we use it. So at least this is my main point.
Thanks so much, Emilia and Sergio and Bart and the UPF in the frame of HUMAINT for organizing it. And thanks so much for the audience and to all the speakers. Hope we didn't disappoint you, as I said before, and hope you enjoyed.